What's happening in this country right now? Why have we come out here? Every day you read in the newspaper, you see on television, 2 Muslim bans, roundups and deportations of immigrants, a border wall, and the forging of a fascist people in this country. Here you have the U.S. bombing Syria, refugees wanting to flee from hundreds of thousands, millions that have been killed. And what does the U.S. do? What does Trump and Pence and the rest of this cabal of fascists do? As they're fueling that war in Syria, they refuse to let Syrian refugees into this country. It's like the United States has set the house on fire and is blocking the doors. You have people in their millions driven from their home countries, whether it's in Southeast Asia, whether it's in Mexico, El Salvador, Guatemala, people who are fleeing starvation, violence, the results of the US-fueled civil wars back in the 80s, people who are fleeing for their lives, who were rounded up, who were hunted down like escaped slaves once they'd gotten here and deported back to death. You have people like Cera Beltran Hernandez, who was dying in a hospital bed, who was being treated for a brain tumor, who was dragged out of her bed by La Migra. You have doors being broken down in the middle of the night, people dragged from their homes, families split apart, people deported. This is the reality. Entire communities are being terrorized. Now, some of us, when we were growing up many years ago in the 50s and 60s, we watched the movie, The Diary of Anne Frank, or some of us read the book where they were hiding out to prevent, so they wouldn't be rounded up by the Nazis and sent to concentration camps. Well, you have the same thing going on today in immigrant communities, among Salvadoreños, among Guatemaltecos, among Mexicanos, among people from the Middle East, people who are afraid to go out of their homes, sending their children who are U.S. citizens to the grocery store because they're afraid to go, that they're going to be rounded up. You have the demonizing and criminalizing of immigrants. You know, I'm going to tell you, Goebbels and Hitler have nothing on Trump and Pence and Sessions when it comes to demonizing and criminalizing an entire religion, entire nationalities, targeting them for roundup, targeting them for concentration camps, whipping up fascist thugs, as we saw during the campaign, where Trump supporters were led to attack protesters and are now being whipped up to go after immigrants, Muslims, and others. And we're here at the Museum of Jewish Heritage because we have seen the bitter and bloody lessons of history. We have seen what happens when people do not act to drive out fascism. We are going to do what the German people did not do in 1933. We have seen what happens when people fail to act as people are criminalized and demonized. And we need to examine. Some people say, oh, you're exaggerating. Some people even told us we shouldn't be comparing the Holocaust and what is happening now. Well, in one sense, they're right. There's yet to be a Holocaust in this country against Muslims, against immigrants, against black people. But the point is, we want to stop this Holocaust before it happens. And that is why we are here. But listen to the words. For those who think I am being hyperbolic, for those who say, oh, you're exaggerating, listen to the words of Trump and Sessions and John Kelly, the head of Homeland Security. This is what Donald Trump had to say in 2015. Quote, what can be simpler or more accurately stated? The Mexican government is forcing their most unwanted people into the United States. They are in many cases criminals, drug dealers, rapists. This is a lie. This is part, though, of a demonizing and criminalizing an entire people. Listen to what Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, the unrepentant, white supremacist, KKK-loving Attorney General of this country, this is what he wrote on the Department of Justice website. We mean criminal organizations that turn cities and suburbs into war zones, that rape and kill innocent people, kill innocent citizens, who profit by smuggling poison and other human beings across our borders. Depravity and violence are their calling cards, including brutal machete attacks and beheadings. It is here, on this sliver of land, talking about the border, where we must first take our stand against this what? Against this filth. Yes, he's talking about the drug cartels, but really what he's talking about are the Mexican people and others who are coming here. Recently, on April 18th, at George Washington University, General John Kelly, the head of Homeland Security, said, quote, he ranted that people are coming to this country, quote, despise the United States because we are a nation of laws and freedoms. They have a single mission, and that is our destruction. Think about what they're saying. Think about how they're describing immigrants. When I read these words, when I heard what Trump was saying about Mexicans being rapists and drug smugglers, I was thinking about these movies, these films I've seen that were made in Nazi Germany. Go online, watch them. Don't take my word for it. Go find them. What did they do? They'd have these films, they'd have a picture of an Orthodox rabbi, and they would alternate between that and pictures of rats, describing Jews as filth, as vermin infested, as carriers of disease. It was all part of dehumanizing people, paving the way for the Holocaust, paving the way for any crime to be committed against these people in the name of Make Germany Great Again. Well, now we have Make America Great Again. And I just have to say, personally feeling America was never great with slavery and genocide. So that is why we are here. We are here to say clearly to the world, no, 1933, 2017, never again. Never again will we allow another Holocaust to happen to any people. After the Holocaust, millions said never again. If never again is going to continue to mean anything, it has to mean something right now in this country. When immigrants, Muslims, and people all over the world are being threatened by the Trump-Pence fascist regime in the most powerful militarized country on earth, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Drive out the Trump-Pence regime. Now, before we lead a procession over to the ICE offices at the federal building to present awards to John Kelly and Jefferson Beauregard Sessions, we have a number of people here today to speak. And the first person I want to introduce is Scott Gilbert, who was one of the initiators of these actions across the country today on Holocaust Remembrance Day. And Scott comes from a family. His grandparents, I believe, or other members of his family who survived and escaped the Holocaust. And he wants to share some words today about why we are here and why what we're doing is so important. Scott.
Thank you. I just want to say that this is a day of remembrance, but most importantly, in remembering those who lost their lives, in the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. Drive out the Trump-Pence regime. I want to read a couple of quotes. The people who criticize us should consider themselves lucky still to be alive. It would be too much of a good thing if those who live at our mercy should be allowed to criticize. The second one, the end result of this, though, is that our opponents, the media and the whole world, will soon see, as we begin to take further actions, that the powers of the leader of our nation to protect our country are very substantial and will not be questioned. Who said the first quote?
Goebbels.
Huh?
Goebbels.
Goebbels, Joseph Goebbels, November 23rd, 1934. And the second one, Stephen Miller, senior White House advisor, on February 12th, 2017. Just to give you a sense of the kind of language that these people use and how similar it is. As I was growing up as a young man, I lived with my mother, who was a Holocaust survivor, had agoraphobia, would not leave the house because she spent so long in hiding, wouldn't come to see my awards that I got at school. And I was reading, which Travis talked a bit about, the Diary of Anne Frank. And you all know the Diary of Anne Frank. We all grew up with that. How poignant that was. But what shattered me, and I'm going to start crying and I apologize, is she came up to me with a picture while we were talking about reading this book that had her and her cousin Ellen Sonnenfeld and Margot and Anne Frank. They had grown up together as little children. And I had no idea. And I remember turning to her and saying, how could this happen? How could the German people allow this to happen? And she didn't have a good answer. And so I had to start figuring it out for myself. But I said that day at 13, never again. Never again would I allow another atrocity like this to happen, even though I did not really understand what the Holocaust was about, or how other peoples have been destroyed or murdered. And so I started doing work against the war in Vietnam and stuff like this, and I devoted the rest of my life, when I could, in the name of humanity. And so I started to study history and fascism seriously. And more recently, I read an excellent definition of fascism. And please remember this definition as I go through what I'm going to talk about a little bit. Fascism foments and relies on xenophobia, nationalism, racism, misogyny, and the aggressive reinstitution of oppressive traditional values. Fascism feeds on and encourages the threat and use of violence to build a movement and come to power. Fascism, once in power, essentially eliminates traditional democratic rights. Fascism attacks, jails, even executes its opponents and launches violent mob attacks on minorities. In Nazi Germany in the 30s and 40s, fascism did all those things. And I want to jump back a little bit into the 20s, because a lot of people don't understand that Hitler did not just come to power, that there was some military coup, right? That you think about in Chile or some other places. Germany was a democratic country with elections, and Hitler was appointed chancellor through due process. Okay? He went through the normal channels to get to where he was. And Hitler started his rise in 1919 with the Nazi Party, and in 1923 he actually attempted a military coup with General Ludendorff from World War I, and it failed. He was jailed, he wrote Mein Kampf, and fascism continued to rise over a period of time. The political tenor was consolidating, though not solidified for the Nazis yet. Hitler did not win a plurality in the Reichstag. Germany's parliament on March 5th, 1933. He won 43.9% of the vote at that time. Sound familiar about someone who didn't quite get the majority, but I'm not going to chip off on that. But the key point is that the Nazi Party still did not have control. As an example, 11 people in the cabinet, only 3 of them were Nazi Party members at this time. The other 8 weren't. There were 196 Nazi Party members in the Reichstag, which only represented 33% of those in their parliament. Okay? Hitler had not yet consolidated power. It was only through the backroom dealings with the Catholic Party, the Liberal Party, and the Nationalist Party was he able to come up with enough votes in the Reichstag for Hitler to become chancellor and de facto leader of Germany. The German government then voted and changed the German constitution, giving Hitler dictatorial powers, and the German courts went right along with it. Okay? Then evidence started to accelerate from the burning of the Reichstag, controlling the media, outlawing opponents, and up until 1938, the infamous Kristallnacht, which was the day when 30,000 people were attacked, some killed and murdered. Windows, the reason I called it that is because so many windows were smashed that there were piles of glass, crystal, the night of the crystal. And that was a big turning point. But again, this is 1938, not 1933. This took time to develop to that. So this is a critical point I want people to understand. Hitler had not yet consolidated power in 1933. I want to repeat that. He had not consolidated power yet. This consolidation of fascist power took time. An attack here, then it got normalized. Pass a law there, and then that gets normalized. Demonize a section of people, and that becomes normal. The escalation went on and on. This is how fascism develops. It's really key for people to get this about fascism. Look at today and the patterns of Trump. He has been a fascist from the get-go. He demonized black youth, such as the Central Park Five, demanding the death penalty back in 1989, 28 years ago. He put a full-page ad in the New York Times, right? And, you know, later on what happened after these 5 youths spent years and years in jail for something they didn't do, it finally gets turned, they get freed, and Trump said, quote, "Really think about this. Maybe hate is what is needed if we're going to get something done." That was his response. This has been an ascension of fascism for years in the United States, but it is now consolidating at a whole new level with the Trump-Pence regime. Today in the US, Trump is actually being able to handpick his own cabinet. Think about that. Which Hitler never had the privilege to do, right? And we need to really seriously look at who these people are. I was recently reading an article online about General James Mad Dog Mattis. He's now the Secretary of State, who said, "Be polite, be professional, but have a plan to kill everyone you meet." Okay? This is our Secretary of Defense. Or what Steve Bannon said. Really, you know, I shudder at reading this stuff. "Birth control makes women unattractive and crazy. Would you rather have your child have feminism or cancer? Gay rights have made us dumber. It's time to get them back in the closet. Hoisted high and proud, the Confederate flag proclaims a glorious heritage." And there must be many, many, many black and other people rolling over as I'm saying this. It is this kind of thinking that is in the top tier of this country's leadership that is very, very frightening. Gay bashing, misogyny, racist ideology. We can keep on going at that list. Remember what was defined as fascism at the beginning. I'm giving you examples. They are going on now. Hitler wanted to and fed on the concept of bringing Germany back as a prominent imperialist nation. His slogan was, "Make Germany whole again," for the German people. But we all know which German people he was talking about, right? The Aryan nation. He really grabbed hard onto that phrase for years, nationalism. And step back in a minute and look at this. The striking parallel with Trump's expression, "Make America Great Again." Right? Right out of his playbook. The Nazis used two components to make Germany great again: nationalism and religious fundamentalism. Those are the two things that Trump is basing a lot, not just Trump, but that whole fascist ideology and this regime on. Parallels? I think so. I'm going to read a quote from our Vice President Mike Pence, who is a perfect example of this type of thinking. He wants to put into practice, and when he talks about embracing a culture of life in America, a Christian fundamentalist culture with all its oppressive machinations. This is stuff that we really need to understand now. People come up to me and say, well, it's not fascist yet. Well, we can debate that, depending on how you define fascism, but they're missing the point. Do they want to get to that point where we can't stand here and even have this press conference and have this solidarity with the people who died, right? We cannot wait till that time. A similar kind of stuff happened. You know, we see the rise of KKK now and neo-fascist groups. They weren't really around when I was a kid. You can really see the rise of this stuff. Here's one vignette. 1933, in the mid-20s in Germany, Germany had one of the largest women's movements in the world. Abortion was legal. It was, you wanted it, it was on demand. 1933, one of the first things Hitler and his regime did was to make abortion illegal. It was nothing about fetuses and saving their lives, okay? This accelerated law after law after law till doctors could be executed if doing an abortion. Women could be executed for having an abortion. And they started a program the following year, Kinder, Kinder, Kush. Children, the kitchen, and the church. Women lost the right. Women lost the right to be lawyers, doctors, civil servants. Their only role for the Aryan nation was to be breeders. That's what they did to half their population, okay? Hitler said what he was going to do while rising to power. Then he fulfilled his promises, leading Germany to world war and the final solution. But again, I'm coming back. That is the point. The final solution was not in 1933. It was in 1942. 9 years after, I have to do my math. 16 years after he came to power. Depending on where Hitler spoke, especially once he came to power in late 1932, before consolidating fully, and I'm going to read here a quote, attired in a white shirt, tie, and black suit with a little discreet swastika lapel pin, Chancellor Hitler fulminated about hostile foreign powers, the Bolshevik menace, the cultural decline in spineless liberals, exuding ethnic fundamentalism. He said barely a word about the Jewry. Many observers approvingly commented that Hitler had mellowed. Does this not sound like what some of these leaders and media pundits are saying about Donald Trump today? That he is mellowing? That Trump is becoming presidential? Where is the large outcry and about the horrors of the bombing in Syria and Afghanistan? Where is the large outcry about ripping apart Latino families? Again, we really have to recognize what time it is.
That's right.
Today we have a similar type of situation that the German people faced in 1933. Are we going to wait for the Trump-Pence regime to consolidate power, or are we going to step up and say, never again? Are we going to wait for the next time we cannot even have a press conference? Or are we going to say never again and drive out the Trump-Pence regime? Today, we are remembering all those people that died or were affected by the Holocaust. If this museum of Jewish heritage is to mean anything, we must stop the attacks on our immigrant sisters and brothers. We must stop Islamophobia. We must stop the attacks on women so they do not become breeders, as they did in Nazi Germany. We must stop all of fascism. Trump is now talking about deporting 11 million people. That's a staggering number. 11 million people. Many who will end up in a country, which Travis already talked about, where when they return to El Salvador, Nicaragua, or Guatemala, or Mexico, they're going to be killed. So the US government is using these countries to do their dirty work. Okay? We cannot have another Holocaust museum with different faces, but the same reasons for genocide. So I say, never again will we allow another Holocaust to happen to any other people.
Yeah.
In the name of humanity, we refuse to accept a fascist America. And thank you for listening.
Yeah. At this point, I want to bring up a friend of mine, J.W. Walker, who's an activist and organizer with Gays Against Guns, refusefascism.org, and Rise and Resist. Jay.
Thank you, Travis. First they came. First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak for me. Now I think all of us know that poem. We read it in school, we've researched it. A few months ago, doing my work with Refuse Fascism, a group of us was doing a street theater piece, and so we decided to look and see whether there were any more recent, more modern versions of First They Came, and I came to find out that there were actually quite a few. That this poem has had resonance in so many different key points in our societal development since World War II, that it's always been looked to as a source of inspiration to stand up against regimes that are coming into power. And so we found a newer one, and we did a little street theater piece around it. In the altered version, of course, we included all of the different communities that we find under attack here under the Trumpist regime. We included Muslims, we included gay people, we included the disabled, we included so many other groups, we included Mexicans, we included immigrants, we included everyone that we could think of that we found to be under threat. We included women, we included pretty much everyone, because pretty much everyone in this country who is not a native-born, straight, white, cisgendered Christian male is under threat in this country under this Trump-Pence regime. And that's something that we cannot lose sight of. It's the reality that we're all living with. Now, I'm here with Refuse Fascism because I do believe that this regime has all of the earmarks of true fascism, that it has the complete ability, and if not just ability, it has the goal of doing every single thing that every fascist regime that has ever entered into the global politics, that it will try to do them. It has a very, very hard goal in mind to do this Make America Great Again, to do this celebration of white, straight, Christian ascendancy, to bring those ideas to the fore, and we have to stand against it. Now, the Holocaust means so many things to so many people. It's one of the greatest evils that we have seen in the modern world. And in many ways it is unique. But one of the ways that it is most unique is that it was the first occurrence of that nature, of that kind of tremendous evil, to be captured by modern media, to be captured by film, and photography. We saw the emaciated bodies of the survivors in Auschwitz and the other camps when they were being liberated. We saw the mass graves. We saw them in moving images, and we could not look away. The lesson that the Holocaust has given us is that we can never, ever forget that horror, and we must always be vigilant whenever any group or person who has attained any measure of power or who seeks any measure of power tries to repeat those sins of the past. When we're growing up and we're studying, we read Hannah Arendt, we read about the banality of evil. And we look at how the Aryan Germans who weren't resisting Hitler just went on about their business and just followed the lead and just went along to get along. And we see the same things happening here in this country. When we're doing our protests out in the street, we have people running up to us and screaming at us, "He won, he won!" That's the banality of evil. That's going along to get along. That's not being introspective or inquisitive or curious enough to even look beyond the simple veneer that Donald Trump puts out to the public as just a real estate mogul and a reality TV star. That banality of evil is the most important thing that we have to guard against. We have to guard against that normalization. We have to guard against that just bland and blind acceptance that we see so much of among the people in our country. Now, the other thing about that unique aspect of the Holocaust, in that it was captured so vividly in media, in film, in television, that it's been recreated in theater, in film, in books, that we read about it. We read about it in narratives. We read the Diary of Anne Frank. We read Primo Levi. We read Elie Wiesel. Is that we have at our disposal something that the German people in 1932, 1931, 1933 did not have. We have this living, moving, breathing reminder of the depths of evil that humankind can sink to. If they're given a charismatic enough leader, if they're given enough reasons to hate, to demonize, to ignore, to repress. And so we who come out here in the streets of New York City and in the streets of every city across this country, not just refuse fascism, but every group around the country that gets up and stands up, the people that marched in the Women's March, the people that marched in the Science March, the people that are going to march in the Climate March, we are the bulwark against that evil taking hold. In the end, what we're all saying here today, and what the resistance movement throughout the country has been saying all along, is never again. We can never again allow this monstrous evil to be allowed to take power. Because if we do, then our very humanity is lost. And so I say to everyone, no, 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 no. We refuse to accept a fascist America. Thank you.
At this point, we want to read some excerpts from 4 statements that were sent to us today to be read here. Some people who couldn't be with us, but they felt very strongly and wanted to share their thoughts. So we're going to be reading some excerpts from those. This is Rafa.
Hi.
And this,
This
is Eva.
The first statement is from a supporter of Refuse Fascism, whose family actually helped to found a Holocaust museum. in another city. This is just an excerpt from their statement.
Loud.
This is an excerpt from their statement. The similarities of actions between the Trump administration and Hitler's Germany are instructive and frightening. The Trump administration's idea to create a Muslim registry echoes Hitler's requirement that Jews identify themselves as such on their passports. Trump's plan to dehumanize Mexicans, women, gays, Muslims, and blacks mimics Hitler's treatment of the Jews, Gypsies, and others. Trump's deportation forces, headed by General Kelly from ICE, is reminiscent of Adolf Eichmann's grand plan to deport the non-Aryans. We cannot turn a blind eye as Trump's sweeping, discriminatory plans are similar to the incremental steps which led to Germany's final solution.
This is a statement from Professor Fidel Fajardo Acosta, a professor of English at Creighton University. Professor Fajardo is one of the 195 professors on the right-wing professors' watch list. Remembering the Holocaust is an act of memory intended to honor the victims of fascism, but also an act of resistance meant to prevent the reoccurrence of such horrors. At the present moment in the United States, fascism has made a comeback and installed itself in the White House. One of the tricks used by Trump to gain supporters is an old one that was popular in Nazi Germany in the 1930s. It involved taking advantage of the despair and anger of working class people devastated by capitalist greed and its endless wars and depredations. Joseph Goebbels, Hitler's Minister of Propaganda from 1933 to 1945, was one of the most notorious practitioners of that kind of chicanery. Who should be blamed for the misery of the German people after World War I? The Jews, of course, so Goebbels and Hitler said. But World War I was precipitated not by the Jews, but by the greed of German financiers and industrialists, arms dealers, and megalomaniac madmen with delusions of racial superiority. Feeble-minded ideologues like Hitler and Goebbels had no trouble believing their own lies and spreading their hysteria to others like themselves. Did Mexicans take away the jobs of Americans? Did Muslims spread terrorism, and violence around the world? Did immigrants ruin the good life of the Western countries? Most certainly not. America was built on the backs and hard labor of immigrants, Africans, Chinese, Mexicans, Irish, Filipinos, Vietnamese, and many others. We owe a debt of gratitude to all of them. On the other hand, it was the likes of Donald Trump who exported American jobs to the hinterlands of misery where there are no government regulations or minimum wages. The rising waves of populism around the world are not unjustified. Working class people have indeed been victims of the evil schemes of those who thrive on their misery. What is lacking in the current political scene is the proper and accurate identification of the perpetrators of these crimes.
Okay, this is a statement from Donald Shriver, President Emeritus from Union Theological Seminary, and it was written for this Holocaust Remembrance Day. When you visit the Yad Vashem Memorial to the Holocaust in Jerusalem, they give you a pin shaped in the form of the Hebrew word for remember. There are two strong reasons for all of us to remember the horrors of the Nazi Holocaust: to honor the 6 million victims, and to warn each other that as humans, we are all still tempted to imitate such past crimes in our present day. We truly remember the Holocaust of the Jewish people when we defend the lives of people in our own time who are targets of hatred, either in our own hearts or in the policies of our government.
This statement is from David Meyerhoff, a retired middle school teacher. He writes, "My parents and my grandparents escaped from Germany and survived the Holocaust. My grandfather was a world-famous scientist who won the 1922 Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology. Here is David's mother's story. My mother was 17 and living in an apartment in Berlin in 1938. She was studying to be a nursery school teacher. On the night of November 9th, 1938, the young men living next door to her told her not to go out. That night was Kristallnacht, or Crystal Night, when the Nazis attacked every Jewish person walking on the street, threw over 30,000 Jewish people in concentration camps, and smashed every window in every Jewish home, school, business, and synagogue, so the ground was filled with so much glass it looked like crystals. Within 3 weeks, my mother was able to go on the Kinder transport to England to safety and a new life. During World War II, she took care of children in Anna Freud's Children's Center in London. My mother passed away in June 2015 at the age of 94. Life as you know it will not be the same if we don't fight against fascism. How you live, how you go to classes, how you work, what you see, what you care about, and who you care about are all threatened by this racist, fascist government. If we don't take a stand and fight back against this dangerous fascist system being put into place, we face a Hitler-style dictatorship, and it will be too late. This quotation is from a speech by my grandfather, Otto Meyerhoff, who won that 1922 Nobel Prize for Medicine and Physiology. He had discovered how sugar is converted into energy in the human body, and the Embden-Meyerhoff pathway, which is part of the digestive system. Distinguishing between Germans and Nazis is in itself a propaganda lie. I know what all, or 90% of the professors did in 1933, when their Jewish colleagues, whom they had themselves appointed, were deprived of their rights and made homeless. And the same thing occurred in all academic circles and at all levels of society, except in certain areas of the church. They maintained their cowardly silence, or even satisfaction, and not even 1% of the professors were party members. In the same fashion, broad sections of the population, though overall a somewhat smaller percentage, willingly served as slaves and helpers to the tyrants, even helping as torturers and executioners. It doesn't help that a powerless minority kept their hands clean, or that hundreds themselves became martyrs through the strength of their convictions, if hundreds of thousands turned into murderers. It would have been physically impossible for 5 million Jews, 80 to 90% of all Jews in the countries that Germany occupied, 10 million Russian, Polish, Serbian, and other civilians to be killed by just a few Nazi criminals. Hundreds of thousands were necessary for this. A people without any sense of morality were behind these mass murders.
People everywhere who stand with the Muslims, the Mexicans, the refugees, the immigrants from everywhere that have been vilified and targeted by the Trump-Pence regime in ways that echo the demonization of Jews and other groups in Nazi Germany. To all who detest white supremacy, misogyny, homophobia, or xenophobia, and do not want to see a repeat of Make Germany Whole Again, to all who refuse to accommodate, refuse to conciliate, refuse to collaborate with the Trump regime, to all who despise and fear the Trump regime and want to see it driven out, we proudly choose to wear the nose to symbolize opposition to the Trump-Pence regime and its efforts to brand any new group of people as undesirable. Repeat after me. Never again.
Never again.
Never again will we allow.
Never again will we allow
of humanity,
In the name of humanity,
we refuse to accept
we refuse to accept
a fascist America.
a fascist America. Never again!
Never again!
Never again!
Never again!
Never again!
Will we allow
Will we allow
another Holocaust?
another Holocaust?
Is presented to Jefferson Beauregard Sessions III, the Attorney General, and in recognition of his outstanding achievements. First and foremost, we commend the Attorney General's recent Goebbelsian comments about the, quote, tide of evil boiling up from Mexico. As he wrote, "It is here, on the sliver of land, where we first take our stand against this filth." For dutifully echoing the Trump's lead in fear-mongering about the drugs, gangs, and crime flooding across the border. For making sure every undocumented person feels the raw terror that can be snatched, imprisoned, and deported at any time, for any reason, or for no reason at all. As he said, quote, "Everybody in the country illegally is subject to be deported." For hiring many more federal immigrant judges to speed up the deportation process. For criminalizing, helping, and transporting or harboring undocumented immigrants. For slashing the minimal protections against abuse of immigrant detainees. For his bold, quote, "enough is enough" thread to sanctuary cities that they must cooperate with ICE by June 30th or have federal funding cut off. For fearlessly holding the thin blue line of law and order against the tide of, quote, "rising crime rates." Alternative fact. For withdrawing federal oversight and minimal restraints imposed on local police so they can take off the gloves and do their job of all new levels of violence against Black and Latino people. For his efforts to make white Americans feel special again. As he said, "It is time to champion the interests of those constantly neglected on the question of immigration. The men and women and children we represent, the citizens of this country to whom we owe our ultimate allegiance. And in the category of lifetime achievement, we recognize his wholehearted commitment to making America great again. Joseph Goebbels would be proud."
Hold it up, hold it up. Next, will you read home? This will be a good trick.
The Adolf Eichmann Award for leadership in the field of detention and deportation of, quote, "undesirables" is presented to General John Kelly, Secretary, U.S. Department of Homeland Security, in recognition of his outstanding achievements for striking terror into the hearts of Muslims everywhere by enforcing Mein Kampf's January 27, 2017 Muslim ban. For his tireless effort to begin construction of the border wall by the end of summer 2017. For not letting the, quote, "political correctness that for too long has dictated our approach to national security stop him from racial and religious profiling and torture. For his shameless commitment to separate families. As he said, quote, "I would do almost anything to deter the people from Central America." for adding 10,000 new ICE agents and 5,000 Border Patrol agents to speed up arrests and deportations. For his recent Homeland Security memos making every undocumented immigrant a target. Expediting removal without due process, expanding secure communities to enlist all local law enforcement in this heroic effort. For heartlessly arresting a brain tumor patient out of the hospital, a father dropping off his daughter off at a school, a woman at a courthouse seeking protection from domestic abuse. For the first deportation of a DACA recipient. In the category of lifetime achievement, we would like to recognize his efforts as former head of the U.S. Southern Command to keep the Guantanamo Bay Torture Center open. As he said, there are no innocent men down there, and a special Joseph Mengele appreciation for overseeing the force feeding of hunger strikers there. This, we proudly give him the Eichmann, oh, I'm sorry, I misread this. The Eichmann would be proud.
We're going to film them on camera rejecting this if they want to reject it, and we're going to give it to them. Okay?
Do you have the awards?
Okay, so everybody, we have these awards. This is the federal building. We want to present them to the government officials who are responsible for these crimes. And we are going in to deliver them to the federal building. And Travis is going to lead this procession. We are going into the public building, and we want to give these awards.
Okay. There's a Justice Department office. There's a Homeland Security office in the federal building. We want to deliver it to whoever.
We're actually delivering these to the deputy field directors, Wilhelm Bierman or Maria Guerra,
Okay.
who are office field directors.
Okay. And these things need to go up front. Wait for your seat.
We're not in front of you.
They don't know what to do. No.
It's locked.
Oh yeah, they locked. They threw us out and locked it.
So you want to leave it for them, and you want to know how they're going to get it.
Maybe put it under the door.
Wait, get it on camera. Take the awards out. Take the awards out. Take the awards out and slide them under the door. One after the other. Narrate what you're doing.
Okay, we are now delivering the Adolf Eichmann Award to General John Kelly.
Tell us exactly what you're doing.
Around here.
So you've been locked out. Just tell us what's going on.
Okay. We are here to deliver the Adolf Eichmann Award to General John Kelly in recognition of his outstanding achievements. He is the Director of Homeland Security, Secretary, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. We're here to deliver this, and as Scott read earlier, in recognition of his outstanding achievements for striking terror into the hearts of Muslims everywhere by enforcing Mein Trump's January 2017 Muslim ban. Okay? Now, we tried earlier to deliver this, and they wouldn't take it. Told us to come back tomorrow. So we're going to slide this under the door. So that they can present this to him. I'm going to slide both the award and the instructions on the envelope of to whom this is to be delivered. Because as it says, April 24, 2017, please deliver to General John Kelly, Secretary, U.S. Department of Homeland Security. Did you want this? No, I don't think so. They're locking the door. Okay. So, I'm going to have to slide this under the door. Okay. Up. There you go. Well, it's too late. It's already underneath. So, we've now slid this under the door. We have left this for them to deliver to General Kelly in recognition of his outstanding service once again, because we're all appreciative of what they've done. And so we have accomplished our mission today on today, National Holocaust Remembrance Day, of saying no, never again will we allow another Holocaust to happen to any people. Whether they're Muslims, Mexicans, black people, Salvadoreños, people from the Middle East. Nunca más is this going to be allowed to happen. Because we are taking responsibility to do what the German people did not do in 1933, which is to drive out this fascist regime. Okay? That is why we are here. To tell the world, to expose to the world what is exactly happening in this country, but not only expose it. To tell the world, to tell the millions of people out there in this country who hate the Muslim bans, who hate immigrants being rounded up and deported, who hate Trump talking and asking the CIA, if we have nuclear weapons, why can't we use them? Who can't stand the fact that these science deniers are tearing up what little regulations there are to prevent climate change, regulations to prevent the greenhouse gases, all of this, which is part of this fascist regime that is tearing up the way this country has been ruled, changing it to do what Hitler did and the Nazis did in Germany. But no, we are not going to allow that. And that is why we came out today on Holocaust Remembrance Day to say no, never again are we going to allow a Holocaust to happen to any people. No. No. In the name of humanity, we refuse a fascist America.
So after they delivered the decrees to Beauregard, Sessions, and Kelly, the officers inside the federal building just looked at the papers. They didn't know what to make of it. I don't think they understood it. And then they called this big burly henchman from the Department of Homeland Security to come down, and he read it, and then he just looked at it and crumpled it up. And I don't know if he kept it or threw it away, but that's